June 17th, 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill took place. The battle was set outside of Boston on the Charlestown Peninsula, and it was the first time that American and British soldiers had faced off against each other. The actual battle took place on the nearby Breed's Hill rather than Bunker Hill, but the Battle of Breed's Hill doesn't sound as cool. I mean, what even is a breed? The actual reason as to why the battle was fought on the wrong hill was simply because the soldiers mistook the hills and dug the fortifications on Breed's Hill. It was an area comprised mostly of hills. This gave the American soldiers advantage over the British. The British had already occupied Boston in the battles of Lexington and Concord, so when the rebels laid siege to the Boston port, they realized they were vastly outmatched, as the British had 5,000 soldiers already in the city and could send reinforcements uninterrupted into Boston, due to the size of their navy and the positioning of the city. General Thomas Gage, the British commander in the city, thought they could easily hold out until backup arrived, so he decided to occupy the surrounding hills to deny Americans any chance of bombarding the city. But his plans got leaked, so the American fortified the hills in preparation for his attack.
Fighting was initiated by a British Navy bombardment under a colonial troops position, but this proved unsuccessful with most of the drum fire missing their targets, but it did scare off a lot of the inexperienced colonial troops. The ground assault was started when British troops moved up the center and right flanks of the colonials, but suffering heavy casualties. One of the biggest reasons being the terrain they were fighting in. It was a grassy hill incline which was almost perfect for military defense.
After reforming their lines, the British attacked again, with much the same result. Prescott's men were not low on ammunition though, and when the Redcoats went up the hill for the third time, they reached the rebuffs and engaged the Americans in hand-to-hand combat. The outnumbered Americans were forced to retreat. However, by the end of the engagement, the casualties of Battle of Bunker Hill were high. Patriot gunfire had cut down some 1,000 enemy troops, with more than 200 killed and more than 8,000 wounded. More than 100 Americans perished, while more than 300 others were wounded. 3 weeks later, on July 2nd, 1775, George Washington arrived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to take command of the Continental Army.
The battle was a tactical though somewhat Pyrrhic victory for the British, as it proved to be a sobering experience for them, involving many more casualties than the Americans had, including many officers. The battle has demonstrated that inexperienced military were able to stand up the regular army troops in the battle. Subsequently, the battle discouraged the British from any front attacks against well-defended front lines. Americans' casualties were comparatively much fewer, although their losses included General Joseph Warner and Major Andrew McClary, then finally closed off the battle.
The leaders of the colonial forces learned that the British were planning to send troops into Charleston. In response, 1,200 troops under the command of Colonel William Prescott quickly occupied Bunker Hill on the north end of the peninsula and Betts Hill, closer to Boston. On the morning of the 16th, they had constructed a strong redoubt on Breed's Hill and other entrenchments across the peninsula. The next day, the British Army, under the control of General William Hull, supported by Royal Navy warships, attacked the colonial defenses. Troops moved up Breed Hills in perfect battle formations. One of the commanders of the improved garrison, William Prescott, allegedly encouraged his men not fire until they see white of the rise.